that this has been such an incredibly difficult week for many in the Asian community. So I'm grateful that we have this forum here with Brand Innovators and the community today. This week, many of us have been trying to make sense of this overall violence, which really came to a bit of a crescendo this past week. And for many of us, it means tapping into our own trauma or aggressions that we faced in our lives. But then we had to continue to show up at work and think about how to lead in that environment, both for our company, to our employees, and to the audiences that we serve. So today we'll focus on that intersection of both personal and professional, and what actions we can take to advocate as individuals and as brand leaders. And most importantly, I think that the thing that I'm very grateful for, that this isn't just for the Asian community. We're not trying to preach to the choir already. So I'm really happy to see that there are so many allies in this audience, and that the forum that Brand Innovators has given us is broader than just that. It's important to have these conversations and discussions in a place where there is a diverse audience, and that's really when we can make change happen. So, you've already heard about our great panelists here today. So I'll just start with kind of a broad question about how have our panelists been managing through this week, and if you'd like to share what has been coming up for you.
I can get started, Judy. I think I couldn't have done this panel 2 days ago. I was in a really tough spot a couple of days ago. And I think not only because of, it's sort of the culmination of the thing that we all kind of saw coming, that the violence would come to a head in sort of this awful, terrible way, but that it is this confluence of all these different kinds of issues. It's the racism, it's the misogyny, it's the classism, it's gun violence. It's so many things coming together in one terrible event. And so it has been really challenging. I mean, I think the 2 days ago, I joined my first meeting in the morning, and my team asked me, hey, how's everyone? How are you? And purely by reflex, I said, great. And then I just I checked myself, and I was like, actually, I just have to say, I'm actually not doing great. I'm having a really rough day. And they were so kind and generous. And I think that as leaders, one of the simplest things that we can do is just remember that we have to be generous leaders, and be aware that the people that we are leading, the people that we're working with, are going through their own journey for all of the things that are happening in the outside world, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's racial injustice, whether it's economic circumstances. And I think that that really came to a head for me personally this week.
I will say it's been tough. It's been a tough month, to be honest with you. And I do think that this week I was on a panel hours before the shooting, and I was talking about the need for our message to transcend past the Asian American community, and why that was important, and the need for allyship, and the need for understanding, at least empathetically, how we're feeling. And then a few hours after that, that's when the news came out that there was a shooting in Atlanta, and I honestly cried. I cried a lot. I cried because I felt like all the actions that we've been taking, trying to advocate, trying to get on all these threads, trying to get on all these panels, trying to raise awareness, it felt like there was for nothing. It felt like we weren't making enough progress. It felt like that there was no action that we can take that would help. And so that helplessness is why I cried. But I also remembered that in the face of such hate and in the face of such violence, we need to remember that we need to continue to fight, and we need to continue to push forward, because if anything, if what the Me Too movement, if what Black Lives Matter taught us was that this is a worthy fight, worthy of our time, worthy of our attention. And this is not, again, not just our fight. This is a cultural awakening. This is a cultural awakening that's been happening for a few years now. And this is that fight is a worthy fight, because the reality is that whether you're a parent, a friend, a family member, we have to continue to fight for a better future. So then the people that come after us don't have to have the same conversations. They can have a different conversation. And so I think the way that I've been trying to get through this week is trying to get through this week. I'm actually on a mental health day today, to be honest with you. But this is an important conversation to have. And how I've been trying to get through the week is just encouraging everybody that this is a marathon and we're up against a lot. And we need to continue to push past the boundaries of our own community so that we can encourage allyship, not just from the white community, but from the Black community, from the Latinx community, because the more that we all understand empathetically that like this is not new, first off, and that racism isn't just targeted at one group versus another, it's targeted at everybody in any way, shape, and form, the more that we can start to really solve the bigger issue, and that's taking the work that we learned from last summer into the future, and not just through May and not just through this moment, but for the next minority community hit and the next one after that.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. And Everette or Mita, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say, in my allyship work this week, I think what has been really difficult and triggering are the headlines of he was just having a bad day, or is this really a hate crime? And that is just even more deeply upsetting and triggering. And part of my work that I take seriously is educating people on that when they ask me those questions. And I think that is not only is what happened devastating, heartbreaking, painful, but then also the misinformation and misreporting that continues only makes it more painful. And so I think, anyone who is on their journey to be an ally and learning, like that's a really big piece of like the miseducation and really standing up when you hear something that is factually incorrect.
Yeah, this was tough. It's crazy because one of my best friends, man, it's hard not to get emotional. One of my best friends is an Asian American woman that lives in Atlanta and lives not too far from where everything happened. And when I visited her, we've been past that, and I couldn't help thinking when I heard the news, like it was just really tough, man. It's to live in a world where just because you look a certain way or you're from a certain community, that someone has that much hate inside of them is just hard to bear. And I really felt for my colleagues this week and had so much empathy for them, and tried to do everything I could to support them and wanted them to understand that this isn't just a moment. This is something that we have to make an impact moving forward. We have May coming up, and a lot of brands are going to come together and they're going to do this and a lot of performative things. And, I told them about our commitment past May, past this moment. This is something that's extremely important. And this is just basic human decency. And so, I'm really thankful for everyone on this stage because I know how hard of a week that it's had to be. And, I thank you for your voices, and thank you for having me here as an ally. So.
Yeah, thank you, Everett. Definitely appreciate that, because I feel like even just that proximity, I feel like there's just a lot of empathy between anyone who's ever kind of faced racism, violence, hate, anything. And so truly appreciate you kind of being here as well. And one of the things, like especially from a cultural perspective with the Asian community, is this notion of like reticence to bring activism to the workplace, or one where the Asian community tends to be a bit quieter. So I just wanted to read something from a recent interview that Michelle Kim, the CEO of Awaken, did with CNBC, because for me, this really encapsulated a lot of my own struggle and what I've seen within my company and with some other folks as well. So in her article, she said, one reason why more people aren't speaking up on the news, whether they're Asian American or not, may be due to a continued erasure of the AAPI discrimination in the US through what's known as the model minority myth, which holds the economic advancement of some Asian American individuals as a measure that AAPIs as a whole don't experience racism. To me, this is one of the main reasons that it's been so important to be vocal and to be an advocate, both as an individual and as a brand or company as well. And I know that, being part of another group, I've seen a lot of statements come out and a lot of folks kind of sharing. And I realize that everyone kind of has their like personal journey in that. And so I'm loath to pressure folks, but I also feel like this is the time for us to be more vocal. But I would love to hear kind of how you've reconciled that, either professionally or personally in your company, and what advice you maybe have for those who may be a bit more fearful of speaking up at work, and for others who may be a bit earlier in their journey.
There was this quote from the Obama administration right before it ended, and the quote was, and it was to encourage people to speak up. It was to encourage people to participate, and it was, is there space among the woke for the still waking? And what that said to me was, everybody is on their journey, and a lot of people are afraid of saying the right thing, the wrong thing, and offending one person or another. And there are going to be a lot of mistakes made. And this is what I've told every community and every brand that has reached out over the past month. There's going to be mistakes made. Some things are going to anger a lot of people. Some things are going to please a lot of people. But as long as you can fall forward, that's progress. That's progress, right? And I do think traditionally, you're right, Judy. I think that we've been cast as this model minority that stays silent, that keeps our head down, and we won't speak up and we won't challenge. And that makes us raceless. That also pits us against other minorities by saying that we're on a pedestal because we're white adjacent. And that's where a lot of anger and loathing comes from. And I can tell you right now, there are so many of us that aren't the model minority, and you're starting to hear a lot of our voices, because that's what's needed right now. What's needed is for us to speak up. What's needed is for us to help guide the journey that everybody is on, just as our Black colleagues did for us and continue to do for us, just as our female colleagues did for us and continue to do for us. And we're all on this journey in this cultural awakening, right? And so I do think that there's a lot of people afraid of doing something. And that's why there are routes for them to take: donations, offering to volunteer their time. But I just ask you to do something. Like, for everybody watching right now, if you haven't spoken up, if you haven't retweeted Judy or anybody here, just do something, because you sitting there alone, not knowing whether to move or not, is hurting us. It's killing us. And the fact of the matter is, especially if you're non-Asian, you not doing anything hurts us even further, because right now we are struggling to get this message past our own community, frankly put. And if you have a megaphone, like, I do think that coming out and helping us get the message out helps tremendously. So yeah, Soyoung, please.
No, I was going to say, Eric, I couldn't agree more with you about, like, I think that this notion of, somebody asked me the other day, like, is this something that's new, that's happening, and I'm like, no. I mean, I've been getting called names. I have had things like, on the streets of Manhattan, on the streets of Boston, on the streets of San Francisco. I have had things happen to me personally my entire life. So this is not new. This is not new. Maybe you're hearing about it for the first time. But you know what? I also want to say that, like, exactly what you just said, Eric, like, do something, both within the AAPI community and as allies outside the AAPI community, because the thing that what I realized is that the acceleration certainly of racist incidents has been during the pandemic, but it's not a new problem in our society. But even during the pandemic, a lot of these incidents happened last year, but you didn't really hear about it last year, right? And I thought about this more, and I was like, have we been in our own echo chamber as the AAPI community? Because we've been talking about it even within the AAPI community from a year ago. Like, we've been talking about it and sharing that these things are happening, and stopaapihate.org started a year ago to collect the data. And the data will tell you that the data's been around for a year now. But it really takes that breaking through to the other side of bringing together a coalition of allies across all communities for us to kind of break out of the echo chamber and really turn this into a national movement. And I do think that that's something that I'm so grateful for, this space where we can have that community as members and allies who are all just trying to make the world a better place for to leave than we entered it. And I do think it's important, even if it's something small, like follow, learn, get educated, amplify, tweet, retweet, comment, whatever it is. All these things, they may sound small, but they break that echo chamber effect.
I would just jump in, Judy, echo everything that our fellow panelists said, and say that storytelling is so important. And as an ally, I think about, but at what cost do I want to get that from a primary source? Right. And so really thinking about who you're placing the burden on. It's not the job of underrepresented groups, as we know, to run your DE&I strategy, to educate people. And so I come from an underrepresented group, but I also choose this work, and I'm the head of DE&I at Carta. And so we're putting together a workshop next week to talk about how to be an ally to the Asian community. But more than just being an ally, it's about education. Exactly to the point. This just didn't happen yesterday, this week, a few months ago, last year. It has been a continuum. There is a history in this country of racism toward the Asian community. And do you know what that history is? Because if you don't really, then jumping into this conversation right now, you should. It can be uncomfortable if you're asking questions and you're surprised that your colleague has experienced, you've experienced racism before. And so that's my only sort of call to allies is, what are you doing personally to help lift the stories of those who are in pain right now and cannot share their stories? And what is your CEO or head of DE&I doing? And if you don't have a head of DE&I, this might be the moment that you think about getting one.
For sure. And I want to say this too, I don't expect everyone to be an Asian American history major overnight, right? And again, that's why it's so important that you listen to these conversations, you engage. There's so many resources out there, but you engage, right? Because again, like everyone said, this is not new. This is woven throughout the history and the fabric of the United States, from the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1800s to the internment camps that my grandparents were sent to in Arizona that are erased from history books. I didn't learn that in school. I learned that from my grandparents. And I think that is one of the most shocking things possible, is that we don't learn, right? And if we learn, we build empathy. And that's why, again, I do think it does come down to a lot of education. Because again, if we don't grapple with these uncomfortable truths, we don't grapple with these ugly spots in American history, we're destined to repeat it, right? And I'm very fearful that if we don't address the education right now, my kids won't learn about George Floyd. My kids won't learn about the atrocities happening on the border of Texas right now with kids in cages. And because of that, then if they don't learn about that, their generation is destined to make the same mistakes. And we cannot let that happen anymore.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. And I think, some of you touched on this a little bit through kind of talking about what companies and brands can do, and knowing that we have this marketing audience. I'm sure that many involved and many who are here, both as attendees and as panelists, have had a busy week, and would love to hear from this panel about, what can brands and do to support and advocate for the AAPI communities or Asian communities during this moment that feels a bit more than, as Everette had mentioned, more than performative, and that feels authentic. And it can be anything from what you're doing externally. And for me, it was so important to have public statements even though there may be a lot kind of woven into that, it was just important just to say something to acknowledge what was going on. And I realized that, I think, being part of this email list, I've seen, and a lot of folks have been sharing, wow, we've got one from the CEO of Walmart, from America's Heartland, like that's pretty major. Because I could definitely see there being a lot of fear of alienating maybe what they might think of their core. So I would love to hear from this group about what some of those things are that you've been thinking or improving upon, both internally and externally, or any great examples that you've seen as well.
I can jump in here. I think what you said about just speaking up is important. I know for a lot of people that can be seen as performative, but you can't discount the brand awareness, like not brand awareness, the awareness of the issue, right? And although you should be doing a lot more, that is like the first step, the acknowledgement of it, and how much that can mean to the people internally within your organization is the acknowledgement, not only internally, but externally as well. I think at Artsy, I hang my hat on to make sure the things that we do are actually going to be impactful and make a change. And so I'm leading a task force at Artsy, putting that together so that we can actually strategically lay the foundation for us to continue to make an impact past this moment, but also to make sure that we're impactful during this moment as well. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is create a more inclusive environment internally for our employees and the future employees that come here, but then also externally give a platform and voices to the AAPI community. And also, as Artsy is a global company, one of the things that I'm very much focused on is that this is not just something that happens in the US. This is something that happens all over the world. And sometimes we can kind of get caught up in what's happening here in this country. But I've seen this happen to my friends that are Asian in Europe, in Africa, all over. This is not just a US thing. So thinking about how we can make a global impact, and then also finding the right organizations to support. One of the things that Artsy can do is be able to raise funds through benefit auctions in our platform. And so we know that, by doing so, that we can actually put money in the hands of people that could probably figure out what to do with those funds a lot better than we can. And so I think just making sure that your employees internally are supported, and feel like they have a voice and feel that the company is there for them, that you're speaking out and bringing awareness to that cause. And then lastly, actually doing something that's impactful, that's going to create change.
Everette, I'll just add to what you said. I read a pretty powerful piece in Elle magazine last night that I posted on LinkedIn. And it was actually talking about how the beauty industry has profited off of the Asian community and Asian beauty trends. And ancient rituals, whether it's sheet masks and rice water and essence and all of the things that you've seen become commoditized and make money off of. And you think, what does the beauty industry owe the Asian community? A lot right now, a lot. And so I thought the Tatcha founder posted a really beautiful note on Instagram of her own personal journey of being a part of the AAPI community. But then to your point, storytelling and just coming out with something very personal, but then also talking about specifically what Tatcha is doing. And so for anyone who is in the beauty industry listening, I would really ask you to think about specifically whether it's starting with storytelling, which is really important, and just coming out to stand with the community, and what you might be thinking of doing long-term.
Actually, since I'm in the beauty category, I'd love to use an example that we saw last year happening in June, which was a call out and a call to hold brands accountable within the beauty industry, the Pull Up for Change movement. And it was really started by somebody who's like, look, you brands, you beauty brands, you profit off of the dollars that Black consumers spend on your brands. And I want to see the receipts of what are you doing to give back to our community. And this was also very specifically about corporate America and the fact that corporate America is incredibly, disproportionately white when a lot of the consumers are actually, representing many different communities of color. And so it was a really, I thought, an incredible way to leverage the power of consumers who today vote with their dollar, leverage the power of transparency in social media, and then hold brands accountable to basically show, tell me, and very specifically, tell me who at the manager level, director level, C-level, board level do you have, and be very specific. Don't just say diverse, be specific and say, no, this is, we have Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, and I thought it was just a brilliant movement, that was started by one woman who was just kind of like fed up with seeing it. And I thought that was really amazing. It was a great thing to learn from. I also have to use the example of Everette at Artsy, because I know you just shared with us some of the great things that you're doing. The other great thing that I think that you guys are doing is just you're showing and representing diverse work through your platform, which I so appreciate, because the reality is that the model minority myth can't exist once people realize that it's not just one model minority story, that we're not just doctors and engineers and mathematicians or whatever it is, but that we're artists and creators, and we represent a much more diverse swath of humanity. And what better way to show that than through the power of art? And so I just really love the work that you guys are doing to showcase and represent artists who come from all different backgrounds, because it's such a great way to showcase humanity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think for me, a big, maybe not in the artistic community per se, but the thing that I always come back to think about, especially where a lot of this violence tends to happen, are, at least in the US, tends to be vulnerable immigrant communities, and that tend to be small business owners. And I'm also the child of a small business owner, and I held a kind of chat with our team internally, and just like a group of 20 folks kind of jumped on from the Asian community at Pinterest. And something, even though they may not have shared at that time, I got so many pings that so many of our parents have been held up at gunpoint and have faced so much violence as part of trying to realize that American dream here. And it's that kind of notion that that's just a part of the experience and that they never reported it. And even my own parents, when I think about that, we were like, why aren't you reporting this? They're like, because nothing will happen and we don't want to cause trouble. We just want to be here and continue to work and live. And so I think that's kind of a big piece of also why I think this advocacy and being vocal is so important to me personally, and to figure out, how can we continue to go beyond what the model minority kind of that kind of the frame that's been created for us to play in. And so thank you all kind of for sharing in that realm. And I feel like that also may have answered some of the questions that we're getting through chat as well. So I think this might be a bit of a just a shorter question, and I'm sure some of us will have some similar kind of resources or people or things that we're thinking of. But for those who are a bit early in their journey, this can all feel a bit overwhelming. And is there, to help people and brands get started, is there something that I would love if you could share one of each potentially, who should they follow? Where should they donate? And what might be one action that they could take today?
Yeah, for sure. About 3 weeks ago, we launched GoFundMe.com/AAPI as a consolidation point for a lot of donations. It goes to different nonprofits, different organizations on the ground right now, vetted in different cities, from Philadelphia to New York to Oakland, Los Angeles. So that's GoFundMe.com/AAPI. We had a hope of getting to 500,000. We had to move it once we hit 1 million, and now we hit 2 million yesterday. And so we moved it again to 3 million. This was started by a CMO of GoFundMe, a fellow South Asian brother, Musa Tariq, Rebecca Ma from Apple, Bing from Goldhouse, and VNL from Lockwood. So I think that's a really great resource. Another great resource is launch.org. That's LAAUNCH.org. They have great resources. They're a nonprofit based out of Silicon Valley. And that's just certain ways that you can get started. But I would say those are two really good ones.
Judy, I'll just add about if I can ask people just to do one thing, and that's to realize that racial trauma is real and not to deny it. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And racial trauma can lead to mental health issues, anxiety, depression, concern for others who aren't with you in this pandemic. And then also real physical issues, whether that's being linked to cardiovascular disease and other kinds of diseases. And so one day off might not help, but it is about offering people the space and time for those who are experiencing it, to give them as leaders that space and time. We are also, Modern Health is an amazing partner of ours, and we're offering healing circles through them. And so just take the time, if you haven't experienced racial trauma, not to minimize or deny it, but to understand what it means.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I do want to jump in there and just say, again, this is not new, and a lot of us have experienced racism, and therefore a lot of these things can be really triggering, especially if you're in the Asian American community. So do be aware of that, and do be conscious of that when you are speaking with, a fellow Asian colleague. It's just like things can be triggering. I did want to say one thing, that there's someone asked, like, what else can you do outside of donate? Donate your time. Go to these places that are affected, and donate time to be a chaperone, walk the elderly home, just be there. I have found and have heard that if you're not from the Asian community and you go to these areas affected, hate crimes do decrease. So just go, visit, obviously get takeout, just be a good patron. That certainly helps a lot. And we're in the marketing community, right? We're in the marketing community, we're in the creative community. One thing I do want to say is a lot of these nonprofits are struggling not financially, but struggling for our creativity, for our strategy, for the way that we see how to get awareness out there. So you can also donate time, for sure. You could also donate your skills. And I do think that, to Everett's original point, this is about awareness. No one knows awareness like us. No one knows it like us, right? And we know how to look at these things and say, here's how you get a hashtag out there. Here's how you get brand out there. Donate your skills, because I do think that makes a tremendous difference.
I do want to plug one organization because I have a couple friends that are a part of it. It's Asians Americans Advancing Justice, and I have a friend that's part of the Atlanta chapter. So you can I believe you can donate directly to the Atlanta chapter. Yeah, I'm a little biased, but I love what they're doing, and I love that organization, and I love organizations that are focused on changing public policy and trying to make an impact in that way. And so just wanted to shout them out.
I think that's a lot of great options. So I feel like I think these days there's no shortage of places to be able to help, because so many organizations have popped up that are doing really great work. To Eric's point, on the ground, AAJC is doing great work on the ground too. And yes, you can donate directly to the Atlanta chapter to help them with what's going on there as well. I was actually talking to somebody about this earlier this week as well. And I thought about actions on the kind of spectrum from like passive to active. And as an individual, I'm not speaking from a corporate level or from an organizational level, but just as an individual, like what can individuals do? I think that the passive is something that we talked about, which is like break out of your own bubble and listen to what's happening in other communities. And an easy way to do that is follow somebody or some source like Goldhouse, which is a great one, like stopaapihate.org. I happen to like AAPI Women Lead as well. And so there are just like so many great sources of information that will inform you when the mainstream, like when big news media outlets aren't picking this stuff up because it's still happening at a grassroots community level. So that's sort of like on the passive side. And then somewhere in the middle is like, I guess that it's not exact, it is active, but it's like donation, because you're not actually personally doing anything, but your money is. And when you're in a position of privilege to be able to share your good fortune to help others. I think we have a lot of really great resources for where you can donate and help people who are doing this hard work. And then the last one that I hadn't seen a lot of, but I think is actually really critical, was I started to research it because StopAAPIHate.org, which is the organization that's collecting all of the data, and they're the organization that just released the data earlier this week to say that the incidents against the Asian community, it's close to 4,000 incidents now since the beginning when they first started tracking. So it's been a little under a year. They actually released a report, which you can find on their site or their Instagram page. And the end of the report actually has verbatims, like stories. And I just cried reading the stories. I cried because not only because the stories are very familiar and heartbreaking, but because so many of them said this one thing that it made me really sad, which was nobody did anything to help. Nobody did anything to help. And I was like, it was just so common. It just kept happening over and over again. And I completely understand if a situation is very dangerous. I would completely personally understand the reticence to help. A lot of these situations aren't overtly dangerous. They're just somebody getting harassed or spit out or dehumanizing for sure. But so then I tried to find like, what could I do? Me personally, Soyoung as what could I do? And so that's where I personally found Hollaback, which has the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. And that's another resource that I think is a really great one as we're out in the world, as the world opens up again and we're out in the streets. If you see something happening, it's just great to like know what you can do to help somebody who looks like they're in trouble. And those 5 Ds I thought were really, really a helpful starting point for me personally to learn how I can move from passive to active allyship for anyone in any community who is being harassed or attacked.
Can I
I love that. I love that one. Oh, go ahead. Everette.
Now, I just wanted to speak to the allies in the audience for a second. You have to be real with yourself and check yourself as well. There's a lot of people that when these things happen, they get all in arms and they want to support and they want to donate money and, post things on social media. But what are you doing to look at yourself and the biases that you may have, and I can honestly say that growing up in an all Black community, I definitely had biases growing up, and these are biases that I had to check. And so I just want to encourage people to do the work themselves, as well as doing the things that are external, because that's going to be so important to check your own biases and check your own things that you need to work on yourself when it comes to this. So I just wanted to put that out there too.
Yeah, that's so very true. I feel like, quite often it's difficult to really get out there when you haven't done the work yourself. So I really truly appreciate that. Eric, sorry, did you have one more build before our last question?
No, I was just going to echo everybody else. It's like, I remember thinking in my head about that one instance in Carmel Valley where the Filipino family was harassed by another patron in a restaurant, and they were just relentlessly harassed. They got it all on video, and you could find it on the internet. I'm sure it's a very tough thing to watch because he's relentless. He's relentless. There are kids at the table. And midway through, you kind of wish someone would stand up. Someone in that restaurant would stand up, because you see a bunch of people sitting around them. And then eventually you see the waitress stand up. She kicks him out. And I remember thinking about this because I've always thought that my experience with racism was unique. It's definitely not. But when I was growing up, we had to leave a bunch of restaurants. And I grew up in Northern California, in a place that's supposed to be very liberal and very inclusive. But we were asked, I remember I could count a number of times on my hand how many times we've had to leave a restaurant because someone was saying something. Someone called me a chink. Someone called my dad a chink. And it's embarrassing. It's so embarrassing, right? And you kind of wish when you're a kid, like, is someone going to stop this person? And no one does, right? And to Soyoung's point, you have to think about what you're going to do. in that situation? Are you going to be the person just sitting there? Or are you going to stand up? Because I can tell you right now, no one stood up for my family. No one has. Whether it was being, my grandpa getting targeted with a hate crime, whether it's us leaving a restaurant, those things continue to happen. And you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do when that happens? Because unfortunately, the unfortunate truth here, if it's not our community, someone else's community, it's another community, you're going to be exposed to this in some way, shape, or form. And you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I know what we're going to do, but that's part of it, right? That's part of the solution, is not being a bystander, but actually doing the right thing. And so I just ask all of you to go from passive to active. And that's one of the greatest ways to do it, is because you will be exposed to it, whether you like it or not. And at that moment, you have a choice. And I do hope you make that choice for the right reasons.
Thank you for sharing that. And I couldn't agree more. I'm sure many of us have experienced that. And like to what Soyoung said, that is so true. And so many of the stories that I've seen, it's just that nothing happened. No one else like stepped in, or you'll see like other vulnerable, like other elderly or small people stepping in. So I think that would definitely be something just even at an individual level to do. So just the last question to hopefully end on a bit more of a positive note, because it's what I like to personally do usually with these talks is, for all of us here, I mean, what does success look like? And what's the kind of dream here in terms of what we can do?
I'll jump in because what Eric said really resonated with me. And as the mom of a 5 and 8 year old, I'm just hoping they grow up in a different world and the experiences than we all had. But I also would say to what he said is like, hate starts at our kitchen tables, and be really intentional about language with the young people in your life. Crazy, stupid, weird, lazy, right? And just really valuing the differences that we see and making sure for our children that we share them in a positive light. And it starts at each of our kitchen tables.
I totally agree with that. About also, if I were to say what success looks like, it's that my kids who today take great pride in their heritage, they continue to have that love for where they come from and for different cultures.
Success looks like to me, and I love that you both spoke about your kids, because every time I think about my kids and like what's happening right now, I get very, very emotional. And so I'm trying to pull it back right now because it means so much. Because we need to make sure that they do have different conversations than we're having. I need to make sure that they don't get targeted for not being white passing, and they're half, right? My kids are half and they're not white passing. And the fact that I even have to say that breaks my heart. And that's what success looks like to me, is that they have different conversations. They live a different way, and they don't think like I did that racism is just a part of my life. From when I was a kid, leaving restaurants, to even when I got into my career, white colleagues used to tell me all the time, oh, Eric, like we don't see you as Asian, we see you as one of us. And I used to think that was okay. I used to think that assimilation was totally okay. And it's not okay, right? And I just don't want to feel, success looks for success for me is my kids don't feel the same pain that I feel right now as we speak. That's what success is for me.
Yeah. For me, I just hope to live in a world where there's just basic human decency, that people care for one another, stand up for one another, that we don't find so many ways to separate each other due to things that genuinely don't matter. And I know that progress is a slow process, but I just hope that everyone is committed to trying to leave the world a little bit better than they came into it. So, my heart goes out to the community and anyone who's dealt with this. We're all in this together. So.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to Soyoung, Everette, Mita, and Eric, and to the Brand Innovators team for having us. And thank you all who jumped in to hear us share.
Thank you so much, all.
Thank you.
This is so important to the AAPI community and to me personally. I mean, I have dealt with a lot of this kind of stuff growing up, and a few years ago, I thought, oh, this is done. I mean, like, everyone loves Asians. There's crazy rich Asians. People think that Asians are so beautiful, but it never really ends. And like, this was so triggering for me because I thought of like my childhood growing up and how I tried to not uplift my own culture. I was like, I'm so proud to be a Twinkie. I'm Asian on the inside, white on the inside. That was such a thing that we used to say. But now I'm like, I don't care if I only have 1,000 followers or if if I can't donate like more than $100. You got to do it, and you got to keep fighting the good fight, and don't be. I can't stay quiet any longer and not be proud of who I am, proud of who we are. So thank you so much. I mean, I was just telling the team, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to capture any like good smiles from this panel because it's such a serious situation. But I am so grateful for each and every one of you for taking the time to talk about this subject, and for all the attendees for listening to us. And hopefully you can take something out of this and retweet, donate, take actions, stand up, and just support each other. And it doesn't end here.